responsible and ethical data sourcing for AI deployment. And as we get prepped up for the final session, may we request once again all our audience members to please not crowd around the stage, allow the opportunity to the speakers to please network outside, and may I request all our audience members who are just joining in to please occupy the first and the second rows onwards, and may we request you all to please be seated as we have a lot more networking opportunities ahead for you. With that being said, allow me an opportunity to now call upon our moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, with a big round of applause, let's welcome Mr. Nitin Saxena, Partner FS Digital, KPMG. May I take the opportunity of calling upon our speaker, Mr. Nitin Chugh, Deputy Managing Director and Head, Digital Banking and Transformation, State Bank of India. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, let's be much more courteous with that applause, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chugh, for joining us. Mr. Rahul Dayal, Executive Director and CTO, White Oak Capital Asset Management. Let's give Rahul a big round of applause as we welcome him on the stage. And if I may take the opportunity of inviting Vinayak Godse, Chief Executive Officer, Data Security Council of India. Let's give Mr. Vinayak a warm round of applause as we welcome him to the stage for our discussion. So as our panelists are here with us, I'd now like to leave it in the able hands of Mr. Saxena to take it forward.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate the time everyone has taken out for attending this panel, especially Nitin, Rahul, and Vinayak. In the last year or so, right, we have seen that AI has taken off, but basis whatever interactions even we as consultants have with the industry or with the customers, what we have generally felt is there is always a high adoption rate in India vis-a-vis, let's say, the other countries. If I look at our primary research, which came out a year and a half back, we are looking at roughly around 78 to 80% of the people in India in some form or shape using AI, right? But at the same time, around 64 to 70% of the people were in some form or shape kind of apprehensive of the data that is being utilized by AI in some form or shape, and how does it dilute their privacy, and how we are going to monitor that, right? Fundamentally, that is what we're going to form the foundation of the discussion that we're going to have today. Vinayak, I'll probably start with you, right? For the generic purpose, let's start with, let's say, where do you see the entire sourcing conundrum of data for optimizing AI utilization? Where does it actually lie in the ecosystem? And then effectively, if we look at the entire AI governance model that is established by the government, along with, let's say, the DPDP Act or the free AI framework, how all of those foundations come together to kind of create a policy or a framework that can enable the entire ecosystem in terms of having the right data policies, right?
Yeah. So thank you, and great to be part of GFF 2025. And I think I like to answer the last part, the regulatory ecosystem for AI, right? So certainly DPDP Act is an important intervention from a regulatory side, and that will definitely bring that accountability or responsibility towards the data, and it will also create a lot of those obligations and liabilities, and also create those who want to be really responsible and legitimate player, they will definitely comply it better, and that's why we'll establish kind of a data governance that is required in the age of the digitization. That's definitely one important part. But from AI perspective, there is still not much thinking of bringing something at early stage of the regulation, basically. So that seems to be prevailing as a thinking, right? So for example, we are trying to find can some existing regulation basically take care of some of the concerns and problems that we have. And also we are, rather than regulation, we are talking about an instrument like a AI Safety Institute. You must be knowing there was a recent notification of setting up a AI Safety Institute. So which is like because this is such an early stage of development of AI, and also more importantly adoption of AI in Indian ecosystem. if you start putting guardrails from the regulatory side, I'm not talking about the implementation side or adoption side, then it may create a challenge with respect to adoption ecosystem, basically, right? And that's why understanding the problems and challenges and study them better, and that's the idea of a safety institute, basically, right? So I think that's the basic foundation that we see as of now in terms of regulation. Even I'm a part of this DPEC committee of the Government of India, which is set up as a part of the High Court's instruction. There also we are trying to see existing criminal penalties or regulations can suffice a lot of those concerns that we think in terms of the defect-specific concerns, basically. So I'll stop here, then we see how the discussion progresses, basically.
Nitin, I'll probably ask you to pick this up. Practically, Vinayak is more on the regulatory side, right? And there is a lot of research and both primary from a stakeholder perspective as well as secondary that has gone into the framework that has come out in the last one and a half year. But from an industry perspective where, let's say, you are dealing with the largest customer base in India, while at the same time you probably, as the largest bank, also get consulted highly by the regulatory bodies in terms of what is feasible. Where do you see the policy or the framework that have been launched by the government till now culminating into kind of curating a significant policy per se for the entire data sourcing for AI?
Well, thank you for that. I think the effort has been across multiple dimensions to begin with. There has been an effort to bring in an AI repository in the form of an AI Kosh. There has been an effort to also procure the hardware infrastructure through the India AI mission. And there is also a recommendation which has come from the RBI committee on what kind of proposed frameworks do you need for managing AI-led models. And there has been occasional mention of how you need to be sure that there is not exclusion and there is no bias, etc. So if you break this into 3 or 4 parts, each of these are finally, I think, rolling up into a common country-level roadmap for ourselves, which I think is likely to emerge because all of these discussions might have started and taken place at different points in time by different entities. And at some point in time, I think we will have to converge it at a consumer level to say that if a consumer is going to be using AI or is going to be provided with an AI-based solution by a provider, by a bank, or by any other entity, what kind of guardrails do we bring about? Now, that will require both regulation as well as legislation. And I think around that, all of the work that has happened so far will start to converge. And that is hopefully the next set of things that we are likely to see.
Understood. Thanks for that, Nitin. Rahul, I probably come to you with the next set, right? Since Nitin mentioned that effectively we are in some form or shape already laying out the foundations with the framework that at some point are going to materialize into something which forms, let's say, a national policy in terms of AI governance, both in terms of sourcing as well as bias removal as well as transparency, or the 7 sutras, as they say, right? But let's say, again, from an industry perspective, you come from an industry which collaborates on a lot of data, not just your own data, also from other parties, because you sit at the intersection of banking, insurance, everything, right? And you kind of act as a distributor pretty often in the wealth space as well. From that perspective, where do you see what institutional mechanisms per se do you think are going to be necessary to operationalize all of the policies or guidelines that have been laid out, right? There's one piece which is theory, but there's another piece which is practicality in terms of what can be laid out immediately and what looks like a, let's say, a long-term roadmap.
First of all, thanks, and it's great to be here. I think the regulators doing a fantastic job by laying out these frameworks. So whether it is the India AI ecosystem or whether it is the RBI, the free AI framework, I think they are fantastic frameworks to follow. And those frameworks typically need to be implemented at the organization level. So at the organization level, to implement these kind of frameworks, I think the first and foremost thing is to have an AI policy for the organization, which is at a board level. Right? The board should go through it and actually approve an AI policy. The second and the most important thing is to have senior management oversight on AI. AI shouldn't be some function that's just running in some part of the organization without any oversight, and it should have proper senior management oversight. I would ideally look at creating something like an AI risk and ethics committee or a AI risk and ethics officer who can actually keep monitoring how the AI is being implemented, whether there are any new developments there, what ethical or risk-based challenges that we could encounter with AI. So that becomes a very, very important part of it. The fourth path on the governance, I would think, is to have a very strong audit function, to have an AI audit, like you have every other audit. As AI gets adopted, it will be important to have that function. Now, these are all governance related, but along with that, I think AI is going to be part of every line of business. It's not going to be only limited to one team or one part of the organization. Over time, every department or every team in the organization will be using AI. So it'll be important to embed all of this in the processes itself, right? So have all the processes redefined to include AI as and when they get adopted. Ensure that teams are trained. That becomes another very, very important aspect, to get training across the organization and upskill the entire organization.
Nitin, I'm going to probably come back to you once again. And since Rahul mentioned, I'm going to just jiggle up some of the discussion in terms of, again, when Rahul says that we have to lay out, let's say, 4 or 5 key pillars which are going to govern the entire organization, which can be either in terms of ethical committee, in terms of maker-checker concepts relying, in terms of the AI policy of the organization. The scheme of things for, let's say, an organization like SBI looks very, very different, right? Because the number of innovators within the organization per se are going to be very, very high, right? Where do you see from a policy perspective, when you're going to operationalize all the framework, where do you see significant challenges coming at that scale per se?
See, I think I can share with you that our policy for responsible and ethical AI has been in place for now over 5 years. So we have a policy in place. We have an AI policy, like Rahul mentioned, should be a board-approved policy. We do have a board-approved policy. So I think from a governance point of view, from an internal controls point of view, compliance, etc., while we await legislation and regulations in terms of what you need to do, we have put out our own frameworks in place to make sure that we don't kind of fault ourselves when we develop this. And we are using the basic principles of responsible AI or ethical AI or both. And that is helping us in making sure that there is enough and more accountability for the people who use AI to develop anything. There is traceability, there is transparency, there is evidence of fairness and applied ethics, so that you can also evidence, if it's required, to say that yes, my model really did give a fair and ethical output. And at the same time, because so far we've been working on models and lesser on agentic, which is now coming through, there is also a need to make sure that there is enough and more review and recalibration. Because the models can drift, the models can start producing different outcomes, and you might believe that, yeah, it is an approved model, I had my oversight, but so what if it's giving a different output? The model is doing what it is supposed to do. So the whole recalibration effort, the review process, which further leads to auditability, is something that we have already put in place. What we're trying to do now is that, of course, when we mainstream all of this to, let's say, beyond the models which produce an output to something which is on the go, using agentic, then you need to automate the framework. The framework cannot be a post facto or a sitting on the side sort of a set of guardrails where you know that, okay, I can keep traveling in this direction. I have enough barricades on both sides to not go wrong. You have to make sure that you have enough checks and controls as you move along. And therefore, the automation of these controls is the next step that we are looking at, to be sure that even if a model tomorrow decides to produce an output, or an agent decides to produce an output on the go, how do you make sure that it is something which is, again, meeting the whole test of, going through the test of responsible and ethical AI. So from that point of view, I think prescriptive regulations or prescriptive legislation will be very useful, because we have a policy. I'm sure many other companies, many other banks have their own policies, but we need to come up with standards, because increasingly we are operating as networks. Banking is anyway a network business. So when you are operating as networks, and the previous panel was talking about commerce, payments is an integral part of commerce, or banks are an integral part of payments. So how do we bring about, let's say, the governance framework of an e-commerce company to resemble something of a governance framework of a bank versus a payment service provider, unless and until you have standards, and these are also automated, and you're getting the output on the go.
Thanks for this. Actually, you touched upon one of the pointers that I wanted to pick up in the next question, and I'll come to you with this. like Nitin mentioned, right, there's a need for, let's say, a prescriptive centralized policy for the ecosystem and not necessarily for an organization, right? But at the same time, if you look at India being a very diverse country with different set of ethos, different set of culture operating across multiple states, when I look at that kind of scenario, AI ultimately will have to do fair job and justice to all of those sectors, right? What that underlines is there a need to set up, let's say, a AI data trust, which kind of helps at least collaboration in terms of both the training and the testing data so that the models, let's say tomorrow, as Nitin was earlier saying, if we are going to look at a framework which is going to automate this end to end, and the moment we are going to give AI that right to interact directly with the customer, we will have to have something in place which has tested it out across not just a small sample per se, but at the larger cultural diversity of the country, right? From that perspective, do you see, let's say, is there a national data trust which can be either governed by a collaboration of MeitY, RBI or DSCI to be put in place, which can serve both as the initial training ground as well as the final testing ground per se?
So there is this AI coach which MeitY has put together largely for getting this data set on different kind of use cases, and that is definitely helping startup and a lot of other people to do the experimentation, right? And this open data ecosystem that we are riding on, and many country across group had been also putting, the big companies also put their data out and people can work on that basically. So there's a AI coach is definitely a good idea in this. But as you mentioned about this diversity and the kind of challenges that it comes out in terms of you using this planetary level wisdom for your use case basically, right? So there is a, in the value cycle of AI, so there is a definitely researcher which doing research every day, but the model developer, and after that there is the infrastructure provider, tool maker, application developer, and user. So in the entire this value chain, there is a model developer and there is an end user, which is like a bank or any financial institutions which is using that basically. So they have significant responsibility. But in model developer side, the alignment is the process they talk about basically, right? Because you know that it's all, at least until now, till the LLM will be still dominant force, probably the world model will be different from that. It works on attention mechanism. Yeah. So whatever query, whatever use case you have, or whatever prompt you have, it tries to fire those attentions to give answer to basically, right? And this is a planetary level wisdom basically. And you're using that for your use case basically. Sometimes it may generate something which is harmful for you or illegal for you basically. So there are almost 45 different type of the content basically against which the alignment of models can be checked basically. In fact, unfortunately, MeitY is now looking at that particular part as well. There's not much work happen in India from benchmark perspective, right? And benchmarks are largely happening on a cultural side. Still, we don't see that significantly in India. But the benchmark should also happen on a sectoral side. For example, bank is using a model, like a global planetary model, basically. So bank has their own constraint and contours to work on, basically. So against that, there's a benchmark available. Then you will be able to select which model will be more relevant to the use case that I have, basically. So here, I think there is a significant gap in terms of developing benchmark for the sectoral requirement, basically. If that happens, I think significant one of the important decision of the governance of AI is which model you are choosing and why you are choosing that model, basically, right? And then you are generating on top of it, basically, for your use case. And you are exposing your data to that model as well, basically. So how do you do that? And this gap is basically an important part, and I am seeing this responsible AI, all of these requests coming to MeitY. There's certainly some proposal that we have seen on setting up such kind of benchmarks in the country.
Understood. Thanks for that, Vinayak. Again, I'm just going to delve a little deeper into that and probably come to you, Rahul. In terms of, let's say, as Vinayak mentioned, that there is effectively already in some form or shape data which is being put in place either as part of the AI coach or as part of the other standards, right? But there is significant impediment, especially, let's say, in terms of the very high-risk areas of a particular sector. For example, if I look at financial sector, probably your credit underwriting, your fraud detection, all of those areas are very, very specific, right? Where do you see, let's say, apart from the government playing its own role, where do you see a private-public partnership playing a larger role in kind of setting those standards out, especially in the areas which are going to have a very high impact, both if we have false positive or false negatives in the larger ecosystem, owing to AI implementation across the process life cycle?
So Nitin, I actually see it three ways. Right? It's not just public and private. It's public, private, and academic. So there's a partnership of three ways that needs to go. And I'm very proud that India is actually one of the leaders in doing something like this. There are only few other cases that I know of where AI innovation is happening with a three-way partnership. Perhaps US is one, the Alan Turing in UK is another, probably AI Singapore is the third. But I think beyond that, only a handful of others, and India is one of those in the league to have done it. Now, we have a three-way partnership where the regulators and the government are putting up frameworks. They're putting up the guidelines that we do to put in AI. Along with that, we are putting up data repositories like the AI Kosh, providing infrastructure as part of the India AI stack. So, this is a lot of things that the public sector is doing and the government is doing. Let's look at the private sector. So the private sector is then having a lot of domain knowledge. They bring in a lot of use cases that they want to do on AI and so on and so forth. Along with that, they have a lot of funding that they can bring in because eventually they're going to use it for commercial purposes and so on. So that's the part that they play. And then one of the important parts that played by the academics, right, the academia, where they have the capacity to do a lot of research. That's where they can do research on AI, they can do research on other fields and so on and so forth. So that's what they bring in. They bring in a lot of training, upskilling of resources. And finally, also they bring out a lot of talent that can do audit of AI and things like that. So there's a three-way partnership that's required. Now,
Have the bandwidth for research. You need PhD scholars, you need the faculty, you need the academicians to drive that sort of an effort. Different level of understanding.
just to add here, Nitin, to Nitin's point as well, if you look at the entire RBI free AI paper, that's another example of how all three have come together. That paper has been written with all these three participants being an active part of that and coming up with a framework, coming up with a kind of paper. So that itself is proof that it works well.
Sure. Thanks, Rahul, Nitin. Again, Nitin, just coming back to you from a perspective of, let's say, SBI as an organization, right? If I look at your application landscape, we'll roughly have around 200 odd applications sitting in some form or shape in the bank architecture, right? Now, from a perspective of managing your internal ecosystem, and given that SBI has already started down this journey some time back, are there already some guardrails or frameworks laid out within the organization which kind of manage the entire data sourcing per se, or AI, or at least a framework per se which can be deterministic in terms of how the particular data set is going to be used more from a data governance perspective and a data privacy perspective?
So we have both.
Okay.
In fact, all three. So
Okay.
starting with who will source the data, in what shape and form the data will be sourced. And mostly we are using internal data. We are not using so much of outside data. More recently, we've started generating synthetic data as well for training some models. But in general, we have guardrails and very clear hierarchical, set of rights that who can source what. And then, of course, you have the whole checker layer and the authorizer layer and the approval layer. So we have purposely kept it a little difficult in the sense that, it should not be so that somebody wakes up in the morning, comes and develops a model and deploys it.
Understood.
So it has to go through a series of checks and controls. There is traceability and auditability, like I mentioned earlier. And finally, the impact at the end on the end user. And the end user today, because none of the models are consumer facing right now. And I think we have been wary of exposing some of these things to consumers right now. Maybe we'll do that in future. But things that we consume ourselves for our underwriting, our fraud and risk management, or any other customer service related workflows, the users also have a set of responsibilities when they are going to be using these models. And it is very, very clearly declared to them that this is how the AI model has been built, this is how the data has been sourced, this is what you can expect from it, so that they're aware that there is no black box behind it. And the last mile users should not think that there's some magic that has happened at the back end and I'm just required to go out and produce something with this.
Understood. That helps. Again, Rahul, just taking a leaf of what Nitin just said, if I look at practically the number of the frameworks that are there, the DPDPA Act, and then you have, let's say, the entire data security governance mechanisms within an organization, right? You have gone through the ecosystem across multiple organizations. From your perspective, how do you maintain that balance between maintaining the ethical standard in terms of the entire life cycle of a model management while driving innovation at the same time, right? So, for example, if I have to source data, or if I have to manage data from different areas, how do I keep it, and as Nitin said, right, we wouldn't want to, let's say, having everyone access to every type of data, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to throttle my innovation within the organization, right? In your experience, what is the best mechanism to drive that going forward?
Is that for me or for Vijay?
For you.
For you.
And I'll go to Vinayak after that.
Okay. So, yeah, so I think, Nitin has already covered a lot of these points. So how a very strong governance mechanism is something that is important. Where are we sourcing the data from? How clean is the data? There'll be a lot of data which is legacy data which may have quality issues. Now, we all know that the biggest challenge with an AI model is the data that it's trained on. So if the data that it's trained on is not complete or has some biases, you will get biases in the outcome, right? So ensuring that it covers all use cases. Now, I'll give you an example. There was a very large e-commerce player. I think most of us know that example, where the e-commerce player had a model built for recruitment. And the model was returning a lot more male CVs compared to females because the model that it was trained on was more male data than female data. There's nothing to do with any other bias but the data that it was trained on. So the important thing is to see that the data that the model is being trained on is complete. Right? It doesn't have any biases in the data itself. So these are the kind of things that we'll have to keep in mind before we use these models, completely in the organization. The other big piece that I think we should do is document everything. I think that's something that's extremely important. Along with explainable AI, it's also the documentation of what's being done, why the model is doing certain things, and have that all in place in the organization.
Understood. Vinayak, I'll probably come to you on the other side of the coin, right? We heard Nitin, Rahul both talk about how as an industry they are going down that path, but sitting more on the policy and the regulation side, where do you see the most gaps versus the challenges coming in from a perspective of the entire AI deployments in the BFSI industry?
Yeah, so as of now, I think most of the ecosystem is trying to see that's what the pre-AI, the name pre is very important for that report, right? It's enabling and promoting use of it basically, right? While taking care of some of the challenges, right? But the real challenge, which we are also seeing from the defect, and that's very criminal in nature, right? So very difficult area of AI, because most of other things are largely ending a civil issue, civil problem. But when you talk about defect, it ends up to criminal penalties most of the time, right? So that's the very important to understand how it really philosophically work compared to black box AI that we used to have, right? So the content length that you talk about, context length, input length you talk about, right? Basically, so they're talking about now 1 million, 2 million context length, right? And 1 million, 2 million context length means almost 7, 8 books that you can upload at one go. And then it can start answering question which is relating to book number 1 to book number 9 of 10. And now they are increasingly talk about 100 million, 10 million kind of a context with basically, right? So one fundamental understanding is AI doesn't consume your data at all. I mean, at least the mature model. It sees the data and it does the similarity search basically, right? And it's understand, so it doesn't need to know or probably consume your data, but it understands the context. And that's the pioneer nuances in a data basically. That's why it is when you're uploading PDF, it is able to answer any question in any language. And you yourself, even if you've written the feedback, you may not be able to answer that question basically, right? So now, entire our security or data governance has been devised like giving a document as a critical or restricted, such kind of classification level. Now you just imagine AI, especially in this ecosystem, is looking at a million different pathways. How do you control that basically? So this is a very interesting engineering challenge basically. And knowledge base, generation and security of that is such an interesting engineering challenge basically. There are various different views and interesting things are coming in this basically. I believe the input-output control is still easy, but the knowledge-based security is a very interesting part of this basically. In data governance ecosystem basically, whether you want to do it outside the AI or inside the AI basically. Inside the AI, I engage with a lot of startups working to solve this problem of knowledge-based security, both in a graph database as well as the vector database. Graph is challenging, but vector is more challenging, basically. It's a very semantic relation that it tries to bring together, right? And there are very interesting 6-7 different ways that people are putting together for that. And there are other tokenization for that matter, anonymization for that matter, but tokenization, anonymization contextually is very difficult. You can't have blank tokenization, blank anonymization, basically. Then it will not get any contextual output, basically, right? The very simplistic understanding exists as of now, right? How can you do anonymization more tokenized way? In particular query, you need to share data. In particular, you are not required to, data needs to be probably anonymized, basically, right? So this is an interesting engineering challenge, basically. How you enable invention of such kind of a possibility is a very important intervention. And I'm happy one of the key thing that MIT is doing, inviting a lot of proposals, and they have significant budget to invest into startup and academic idea in this area, basically, right? This is one important part. And then understanding this and writing policy. And that's why I'm happy we are not really hard-coding the governance policy. We have this AI institute, and there are different, we are interacting with a lot of those kind of different things. This AI institute is trying to take this understanding that we understand this better before we really put a very stringent policy outcome, right? And we need to really inculcate that thinking in enterprise deployment as well.
That was insightful, Vinayak, to say the least. Rahul, just taking another point from what Vinayak was just saying, right? If I look at majority of the models that are currently being deployed across, right? As Vinayak rightly said, most of the time it is gauging the data to analyze the context and then using the billion parameters on the neural network to come back and answer something, right? But if I have to build out a RAG framework on top of an LLM, or if I have to, let's say, fine-tune a domain-specific model, there is still some amount of data that is going in, right? And fundamentally, given the amount of compute required, many of the times this entire ecosystem is still operating on cloud, right? Now, given those balance of pieces, do you think there are going to be compliance challenges for industry in terms of managing the data that is going out, especially in, let's say, a RAG-oriented ecosystem?
Well, see, challenges with data will always remain. Like there are 2-3 things. First of all, organizations will have to ensure or probably a document of what kind of data do they want to put on these AI models and what they don't want to put. Now, it's not necessary that all these data models are on cloud. You could probably have instances of your own, or you could have it on your own on-prem infrastructure. So it's not necessary that it has to be on cloud. But still, there are some governance challenges that will come in. So there are things like, like he just mentioned, what data do you want to anonymize? What data you don't want to anonymize? Right? And like I was alluding to earlier, how do you ensure that your data is complete and accurate so that your output is complete and accurate? So those kind of challenges are going to remain, and those will be faced by every organization. We'll have to kind of work through all of those challenges. For that, we'll have to put in those processes that we spoke about earlier around data governance.
Perfect. Just taking another step on a very different direction, and then I'll probably come to you with this. in terms of, let's say, there's one piece in terms of anonymization of data, which might make us, let's say, lose the context of going down and training a particular model. So there always has to be a thin line or a very delicate balance between in terms of what data I need to protect and what data I need to anonymize, so that my output of the AI model still remains, let's say, at a particular level. But with the DPDP and other regulations coming in, where the consent management is also going to become a larger part of the ecosystem, right? The data that we are currently generating, either from the customer or the synthetic data even that we are generating, still uses some form or shape of the base data from the customers and then replicates it for the larger sample set, right? Now, in the parlance of the DPDP Act, where we have to manage consent, how do you think this entire gamut of data governance per se or data security changing while adopting the organizational data for AI?
No, I think it will evolve. There is no fixed answer to that right now because the rules are yet to be enacted. And while we generally are aware of what is in the works, but the principles of protection, making sure that there is anonymization and de-anonymization also when it is required, those principles have to be put in place as you run through these workflows. And that again brings us back to the whole point as to who's pulling the data. We are not yet talking about who's generating the data. The data is obviously getting generated from customers.
Yeah.
And we actually fuss a lot about, PII. Actually, PII is not that important because PII is very individualistic. If you have to develop a model which is, let's say, accurately reliable for 1 million customers, PII becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
So you are looking at data which is largely in motion, data which is on the fly. And most of that data is generated over a period of time. And that can be very easily anonymized. You don't require any kind of PII attachment to that.
Agreed.
So when you look at that large chunk of the pipeline data and use that for training and put these kind of guardrails in place, there is no risk in terms of making sure that it is not fair or ethical. And DPDP also therefore you comply with, because DPDP again goes back at the consumer level. And as a data fiduciary, you are performing the role of making sure that you are not using any PII, you are not compromising any individual or using an individual's data to train a model.
Understood.
So Nitin,
Yeah,
I
Vinayak,
just
please.
want to add, because privacy is such an interesting, especially agentic AI, and because agentic AI needs to consume, because agent do action if it consumes every information and gives logical output for that, basically, right? So data minimization definitely goes on to us when we talk about agentic AI. And you have to make the data available for agents to consume and really provide that output, basically, right? But there is a new paradigm. For example, if you have to replace entire your call center with an agentic call center, a lot of experimentation happening, right? Then I know then you need to understand intent of the customer, because customer is now AI need to interface. Customer is talking to you. We will be in voice or probably in chatbots, basically. So there is an intent agent which is capturing intent. Then intent privacy becomes on task. Then there is you also need to understand emotion of the customer. Whether it's angry, agitated, or happy, right? Then there's emotion agent as well. So now entire new ideas and concepts of privacy is coming. We develop a kind of framework to understand this new paradigm of privacy, intent privacy for that matter, content privacy for that matter, right? You can reconstruct the entire conversation through that. You can reconstruct the personality of the person, basically, right? So a lot of new ideas of privacy is coming in here, basically, and some of the discussion of a fiduciary, because until now, fiduciary is purpose and mean, but now a third thing which is adding here is a wisdom. You are not using your wisdom. You are using some wisdom which is globally available, Brahmagyan which is available to you. So what about that wisdom, basically? And who takes responsibility of that is a very interesting problem that's coming.
But the thing is that when you delink the front-end agent, let's say I'm a customer calling a contact center, I'm talking to an AI agent. That conversation has to get personalized. But it is like a momentary contract between the customer and the agent, which is representing, let's say, the brand or the bank in our case. However, I was talking mostly in terms of how you train that, the call center agent.
Yeah.
The call center agent is trained on not PII.
Yeah.
Because otherwise then the call center agent knows that, oh, you are going to be calling and I need to talk to you like that.
I understand what you're saying. So that is you will take care. But in AI interface way, customer, until now, IVR or any other channel, customer have very limited way of giving input. But the customer is talking to you. Exactly. You will tend to do more talk to more about you, and that will create a lot of challenges in that sense, basically.
So for example, and I concur with Vinayak on some pieces here, and then probably I'll draw your mind again on this. But for example, in one of the conversation, especially on IVR, one of the cases that we noticed with a startup recently while working with a larger organization, the customer registered a complaint, but at the same time talked about where they stay, what is the current situation or the let along of the area, and all of that conversation got translated and went to an AI engine, right? Now, the problem is not just the structured data. The problem is when we are going to have agentic per se translating it for us and taking the action, then we generally do not have the end-to-end control on what data is going out, which kind of
That is where you need the guardrails.
Yeah.
You can't be using PII in that interaction to train your model or better train your model.
Yeah.
So you have to de-link that,
Yeah.
and you have to say that this is my momentary contract, and I will use this only in the context of this interaction, and maybe remember it for my next interaction with the same customer. But you can't use that for training. What you can use for training is the outcome from there.
Yeah.
Let's say the nature of complaint or the issue that happened, and then you can,
Yeah.
kind of extrapolate that.
Okay. Rahul, I'll come back to you, and probably the last question, I'll open it up for the closing comments to the panel. But you have also worked across, let's say, 5 or 6 different financial institutions, both global as well as domestic, from a larger perspective of managing the risk, right? And again, I'm not going to delve deeper because AI itself is bringing 10 different type of risk altogether, which did not exist today, right? But if we have to manage those risks effectively in the coming decade or so, when we are designing AI policy, how much of, let's say, significant deterministic concepts have to go into those type of risk management policy? And do you think there has to be a separate guardrail ecosystem altogether, which again can be an AI ecosystem built in parallel to manage an AI? Something like control systems that we used to have earlier, or there are other mechanisms that you have seen in the industry globally which are being deployed to manage this?
So a couple of things. First of all, 10 years is an extremely long time. At the rate of change that we're seeing today, 10 years, I mean, frankly, I think it's very far off for me to predict. But yeah, for the next few years for AI, yes, there certainly needs to be guardrails. I think these papers that are frameworks that have come out by the regulators are fantastic frameworks to use as starting points. But each organization will have to delve deeper. They'll have to make their own kind of frameworks beyond what, over and above what the regulator is prescribing, because the regulator generally gives you an overarching framework, but each organization is using AI for different purposes, so they'll have to build their own kind of guardrails around what they are going to do. Couple of important things that we've discussed earlier as well. I mean, looking at what data is being fed into these things, whether you have anonymization or not, whether the models have the right data sets, they have the right, no biases in the data sets, whether there's enough explainable AI that's in there. Again, it's a trade-off, because explainable AI is a trade-off from performance. Like today, LLMs give you immediate answers, but then they're not as explainable as other AI models would be. So there's a trade-off. So how do you balance that trade-off is something that we'll have to look, and figure out as we go along. So these are the things that we'll have to take care of as we go along.
Sure. Thanks a lot. I'll just open it up for the final closing comments. Vinayak, we'll probably start with you.
Yeah, so my final thing is actually appeal to security, privacy, governance professional, right? So this is different than until now what we have seen. So until now, we used to have time to understand and probably find some security, privacy, governance kind of a solutions. But now, I'll tell you, the 4.1 Anthropic Cloud AI was different than 4.5. It's such a evolve now, 4.5, so is the ChatGPT 5 and many other new models coming in. Right? So one of the key KPIs, which is in some organizations coming for the security governance professional, is how much time you take to allow access to the latest model coming in. And that timeline is squeezing a lot, basically, right? So if you don't allow your organizations to use the latest capabilities, basically, then you are creating constraint. This time it will be taken heavily against the security, privacy, governance professional, basically. So probably maybe business sometimes lead in terms of adopting technology, but this time if security, governance, or privacy professional doesn't understand the AI which is coming next. So as a DSCI, we are saying that security professionals should understand edge of current paradigm, so that they should able to catch what is coming next. And they should be little bit leading business here. because enablement of new capability is very important. And this is actually appeal to security policy, understand this much better and be a little bit ahead in terms of your understanding from tech and business perspective so that you can really add value from your side, basically.
Sure. Thanks, Vinayak. Rahul?
So yeah, like he said, I think AI is here to stay. It's going to touch every part of our organization. It's important, according to me, to have all the frameworks put in place so that we can adopt AI quickly and make a difference in the business. Because those who adopt AI or upskill themselves to AI are going to survive. The rest will probably find it difficult. So from that perspective, a governance model would be extremely important, whether it's related to data or the models itself.
Sure. Nitin, any closing comments from you?
I think we have this chance, since I think we generally acknowledge that we might have missed the whole LLM creating part of the bus.
Cycle, yeah.
We missed that bus.
Transformer cycle person. Yeah.
But I think we do have a chance to bring out a national sort of a common set of standards, common set of objectives, inclusion, set of governance, responsible AI, etc., the data trust that you spoke about. This, I think, we do have a chance as a country, and that is why I said in the beginning that all these efforts which are taking place in different places or different bodies in the public and the private sector, when they start converging, I think we have a great chance to run the next wave of adoption of responsible AI much better than anybody else in the world.
Perfect. Makes a lot of sense. Appreciate the comment. Appreciate the audience as well. We can close out the panel with this. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your time.
May I request all our panelists to please step forward, allow us an opportunity to capture you all in one frame, and may I request our audience to give them an encouraging round of applause for what a fantastic closing it has been for the day one at the Global Fintech Fest 2025, courtesy all our speakers.